Welcome back to the secret world of human trafficking. I'm your host, David J. Story. I'm also the author of the Omega book series. Today we have a special guest. Let's go ahead and hear what they have to say. We want to go ahead and welcome Daphne. And won't you go ahead and tell us about yourself?
Sure. I'm Daphne Minks. I live in Desert Center, California, which is a ghost town. I own a haunted home here where
Wow.
I film my show, Dead Energies. I am the founder and CEO and executive producer of Twisted Reels Productions. I create TV series, I do soundtracking. So basically, I'm just a world builder. That's what I do. Formerly, and sort of a little bit currently for more of nostalgia, but I was Bethany St. James. I used to be an advocate for legal brothels. I've stood toe to toe with Anderson Cooper and Bethany Frankel, and I was on the cover of Huffington Post for being Bethany, and she was a very big part of my life for over 20 years. So that's my role.
Wow. Okay. Well, tell us a bit about that background.
But I mean, as far as, what I stood for or why I stood for it
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that there are many lanes of sex work, and we'll just call it that for the purposes of this session. I usually say adult entertainment, but because this is such a, upfront what we're discussing, I will just say sex work to just kind of encompass everything. I felt like there's so many different arms and so many different reasons that people go into sex work, specifically women. And I do believe sex trafficking is a huge problem. Believe me, I'm in no way obtuse to the realities of what that is. But I
Hmm.
think something that does get kind of mushed into that is maybe people that did go into that work because life led them there and they had a choice or a decision, we'll say a decision to make. They made that choice, became successful, and were not trafficked. And I think that's where I had an issue is I felt often that as an adult entertainer who went into the legal brothels and then into full contractual courtesanship where I was traveling with people just on salary. I mean, I just feel like it bothered me. I felt as though people didn't see me as an independent woman, whereas I may have not have started out that way. But once you're branded kind of in that way, you really do kind of come to a crossroads and you have to make a choice as a woman. And so I felt like there was a platform at that time. This was the 2010s. And to some degree, I do think that some sort of protection for people that do it by choice, I think is sort of needs to be in place instead of just sort of acting as though everyone's a victim. And that was sort of where I was coming from. And then I got several degrees, went, back to college, earned a degree in sociology, psychology, the humanities, criminal justice, and administration of justice.
Wow.
And I just really felt like I wanted to educate myself and understand more about it, on a psychological level. And so I did. And that turned into writing and, getting more involved and going on talk shows and being in the Huffington Post and becoming a contributor there. It did kind of become a hate campaign. To be quite honest with you, I ended up being stalked. I am an attempted murder survivor. And all of
Hmm.
that started because of that. And I recoiled for many, many years. And I just have recently kind of come back out and turning 50 this year. So I just kind of felt like I had something to say on the matter when I saw that you were wanting to speak to people about this. And so I just
Yeah.
felt I got some stuff to weigh in on that conversation. So yeah, I thought it'd be an interesting chat.
Go ahead and just let it all out.
I mean, I don't really know what you want to know. I mean, for me as a stalking survivor, I
Hmm.
mean, I really feel like, let me back up. So the satanic panic in the 80s and 90s was a real thing. A lot of maybe your younger viewers don't remember that era of record burnings. And I mean, it was pretty crazy in America for heavy metal and Ozzy Osbourne and all these things. Because when you think of Ozzy Osbourne, we all think of the Osbournes, but that's not the way it was in the 80s. So at 14, I was arrested during the Satanic Panic over Motley Crue tapes and all kinds of craziness. That set me on a trajectory where I was persona non grata in most circles of the rural area that I lived in. Many things happened, and I felt as though I needed to make a choice. If I was going to get out of rural Appalachia, where there were no jobs, there was nothing. If you found a man to marry that didn't beat you, you were a success story. I mean, really, it was like, wow, you have a trailer of your own. I mean, it really was like that was the only goal. That was the ceiling for a woman, was maybe owning
Mhm.
a mobile home of my own somewhere on the mountain. And I didn't want that life, quite frankly. And I got pregnant very young. And so I really saw the strip club in Colombia as, the answer. And that was really kind of what started that path. So I feel like there's a lot of people out there that maybe like myself got started into that business in a traumatic way, but I'm not necessarily sure that's my story and many of the women that I know. I feel like it allowed me to go to college. I learned a lot from a lot of people, women that took me by the hand and explained what sex trafficking was,
Mhm.
explained what a daddy was, explained what a manager is. The evil P word isn't really used, the, PIMP, that's not really used. There's names. And I was terrified of those. And I think that that's where maybe some people get it messed up, is because when my stalking started, what I noticed was that celebrities and rock stars had security. And so I figured out very quickly that if I got on the payroll as a friend,
Mhm.
and my job was, there was sex in my job. I'm not going to pretty it up. I'm not. But the vast majority of my job as a courtesan was as a listener. And don't get me wrong, I was very isolated, lots and lots of captivity, in hotel rooms. And, you can't leave. You're at someone's beck and call. So it did have, just like any job, I think, ups and downs. If I'm an emergency surgeon, an emergent surgeon in an emergency room, there are going to be traumas and hours and, things that weigh down on a person, and you're in
Mhm.
therapy and you're working through them. And I think that that's maybe the difference, is that some of us are educated and really did get a better understanding of the world around us. And I'm not really sure where I'd be if it wasn't for the industry. So that was kind of really where I was coming from with a lot of what I was saying. And to some degree, how I still feel, I just kind of feel like it definitely gets a bad rap that we're all these trauma stories and that's it, and that's the end of it, and that's not true. I own my own home. I am an executive. I'm
Mhm.
educated, I'm friendly, and I'm kind. And I think that that's a testament to, it's not always what it seems, and I don't think everybody should be lumped into the same category.
I agree. I never really thought about the strip clubs and the porn industry as being part of trafficking.
I would say, to be quite honest, I grew up pretty much, I hit the stage at 16 and I worked under a fake ID. Everybody knew I was underage. Nobody cared. It was just, formalities back then. Anybody could walk in and get a job. Nobody cared that I was the, 16-year-old girl tired all day at school, trying with my 30-year-old boyfriend. You know what I mean? It's like I saw more of the ugly side in the strip clubs, trying to stay in school, having an older boyfriend that really, quite frankly, nowadays that's a crime. Back then it was just, she was the easy girl, and it was like, you
Yeah.
were the sleazy person because you dated an older man, when it's like, that's, today we know that that's not okay. There's no reason a
Mhm.
16-year-old girl should be out on, on her own. That's a crime now, so I think that times are changing a little bit. But I will say, in my experience, I would say the strip clubs are worse than any brothel, legal or otherwise, escort service, any facet of the industry I've ever worked in. I really feel like there's more managers and daddies in the strip clubs than there is elsewhere, just in my experience. And I'm an old lady. So I can't speak to the industry now, because I think you have more OnlyFans and, these kinds of platforms, but still the same. There's a lot of trafficking going on in that.
Mhm.
I don't support some of those platforms, which I won't call out by name, but There are some that I think are very good that housewives are able to get money together to leave. Truly, I know women that have done that. They've done the AI avatar thing and, have that little stash of money. And that's how they're getting out of an abusive relationship. Judge them? I don't know. Say what you will.
Yeah.
I think that there are things we don't think about, that the word sex trafficking can mean a lot of different things. I think a husband can traffic his wife, a wife can traffic husband. Hey, honey, let's get kinky. And little does that person know
Mhm.
there's maybe being charges, or that's the kink, is the charging for it. It's like, is that always consensual? Is that always an intimate practice between two married people? Or is someone selling photographs of their wife without them knowing, or husband, something like that? To me, that's trafficking. That is using someone for sexual practices unbeknownst to them, or by coercion. I think coercive control is something we don't talk about in the US enough. The UK just passed, not terribly long ago, a few years ago. Don't quote me on that, anyone. It was a few years ago, I believe, that coercing someone to do something is a crime. And it should be. Absolutely, it should be. And I think, for instance, I had a boyfriend, and I'm embarrassed to say it, extremely recently. That's some of the trauma. I will say that. I think sex workers do have a tendency to latch on to these kind of guys, which is, God, you're beautiful. Do you know how much money we could make? You are so beautiful. That's coercive control. If that person isn't like, you know what? You're right. I feel good about me, and I'm going to take these pictures and I'm going to make an account and be proud of myself. Girl power, or whatever. That's a far cry from, well, if you think I should, baby, I mean, and it keeps on and keeps on. It would
Mhm.
really turn me on if you did that. You're coercing someone and breaking them down to feel that they should do this.
Yeah.
And that to me is a crime, no matter whether it's a stripper or it's someone thrown, and I'm not trying to be funny, thrown in the back of a car and taken away. You know,
Mhm.
those two things, they're traumatic for different reasons, but at the core, that's what we're talking about. But I also, like I said, it shouldn't just be an umbrella that every single person that ever receives money for a sex act, whether that's online or, webcam or in person. In my case, I don't feel sex trafficked. I guess if that makes any sense, I don't feel like I was trafficked by anyone, but I did have a situation, like I said, with a boyfriend who did that to me.
Mhm.
And I mean, I embraced it later. I figured out what was happening, and I did do go me, girl power. I made something wonderful out of it. But it did start ugly, and I think that's a form of trafficking that sex workers do fall into. I will say that's very easy for us to fall right back into it. As for me, nostalgia. Well, look at all the money you used to make. Those things are coercive, or we're going to have a little trouble this month. I mean, do you think maybe you could like do a stint at the brothel? I hate to ask, but no, you don't. No, you don't. If that person asks you, there's something wrong. That's the red flag. If that's your
Mhm.
business and, that's your marriage or your relationship or whatever, that's something totally different. That's not what I'm talking about. But I am saying, if you're uncomfortable and someone, says that to you, that's a red flag. That's to me a trouble spot, just in my experience. But I would say overall, and most people don't want to hear this, I don't regret anything I did. I had a good time. I didn't fall, thank God, into drugs, alcohol,
That's
because I
good.
had mentors. I had women that were homeowners in the 90s in Florida, which was like unheard of for a single woman, that they had several properties. They had invested their money. They had, been wise with their money. They weren't partying it away. And I think that's some of it too, is I believe once you go into sex work, the stigmas and, oh, you're being sex trafficked or you're a victim or all these things, people get off track and they start feeling less than. And then they start drinking and doing drugs because everybody around them is judging them and they feel dirty or judged, or like me, a scarlet letter. I will always have a scarlet letter. You Google me, you get Bethany. It's like forever. It's not going away. So I think more support for sex workers is really kind of where it's at, truly, is instead of let me get you help, understanding why they're in the industry on a much larger scale than because you needed money, because you had a dope problem. You know,
Mhm.
I mean, it's just not true. I know women that are working in legal brothels that have doctoral degrees and they've put themselves through school, and they own a house in Portugal and the other one in, Calabasas, California. It's not all that, you know what I mean? So I guess that's kind of where I was. 25 minutes later, I had a lot to say on the subject.
Well, that's what we're here for, to hear and to learn. And, up until recent, I always thought the strip clubs and all where they're dancing and, some of them fully nude, some of them just topless or whatever. Yeah, I always thought that it was all volunteer, that they're just paying their way through college or making some extra money. I never really saw anything wrong with it as long as they were adults and as long as they wasn't forced to do it.
Well, that's the thing, though. I guess there's nothing wrong with it. I loved it. I was a feature dancer, meaning clubs would pay to fly me, put me up in a hotel room, and I'd put on these big, elaborate, Marie Antoinette or, whatever it is, these props and, different things. And it was great. I had a wonderful time. It was terrific. I mean, I loved the house girls. Every time I got to hang out and, just schmooze with the girls for a while. But there were a lot of girls there that lived in houses with several other girls where the daddy, was kind of scheduling everybody and it was a pooled, everybody pooled their money together, but amazingly it all went to him, and like he would take them shopping, but they didn't actually have their own money. You know what I mean? It was more that kind of thing. I just kind of felt like there were a lot of boyfriends doing the coercive thing. Like I said, I don't even know how many, what the times, 10 times or whatever, the amount of guys that couch surfed, I guess you could say, or whatever, laid around on the couch, watched TV, watched the kids, while she worked the day shift and then
Yeah.
went and worked her second job at night. Or, she's working all night long and never sees her kids ever. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. I saw that so much more in the strip clubs than I
Really.
ever did with escorting. Most escorts that I knew was exactly what you were saying. They're putting themselves through college, they're taking a chance, doing an illegal escort service, but they're genuinely just trying to better themselves. So there's that. And I think in the brothels, the legal brothels, the vast majority of women that are there, I would say are professionals or young women that have aspirations of owning a business.
Hmm.
I just feel like it's not always what everybody thinks it is. I think that the strip clubs are far more, at least like I say, back in my day, I think those are far more, you say that, I don't know, coercive, for a lack of better words. I think it's easy for people to fall into it. It's easier, I think, to talk somebody into taking your top or panties off. Cause I mean, I worked full nude, I did. I preferred it, to be honest. You made more money. I think if someone is, it's easier to talk them out of that than it is to actually perform a sex act. You're a great dancer. God, you know what? Like, you're amazing. Every time we go out to the club, everybody's staring at you,
Hmm.
and that's a lot easier for somebody to buy off on and go, you know what? You're right. I get to be on stage and there's lights and, I can, put on sparkly outfits and, shoes and stuff. That's a lot easier, I think, to talk somebody into than prostitution, really. Truly. You should sleep with this guy. So I kind of feel like
Hmm.
that's where the coercive part starts, is it kind of just builds, you know, but I don't think that the vast majority of women that start out that way, end up continuing on for a lifetime of adult entertainment. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
feel like those are abusive relationships and who knows where those go. So, yeah, if that
Yeah.
makes any sense.
Yeah. I've always had the opposite opinion, that I always thought the strip clubs were the ones where they volunteer and they go home at night, and the strip club or the brothels and the call girls or whatever, they're the ones that were trafficked.
I
And
mean,
you're
I
basically
can't
saying,
speak for everybody. This is
yeah.
just my opinion, of, like I said, I just retired, fully retired from the brothels and everything when I was, oh God, 6 or something. So
Hmm.
you're thinking 16 to 36-ish, we'll just call it 40 just for fun, but I don't know, ish, somewhere around there. That's almost my entire life. I've been around that. But with that said, I've also been out of that industry. I turned 50 in October. So I've been out of this industry for a long time. I'm 49 years old now. So,
Hmm.
you know, the world's changed. Even like with, I think, some of the platforms, like I mentioned, and I only pick out OnlyFans because everybody kind of knows what I'm talking about, but like the subscription based, things. I mean, I would have to say we're hearing a lot of really bad stuff coming out from some of these companies, these management companies. These things are notorious for, okay, well, I get a request. Okay, I'm going to do this video. Then I'm going to get this request and I do that. And then it's like before too long, there's really nowhere else for this poor girl to go except some kind of crazy, thing that she probably shouldn't physically be doing. You know what I mean? Quite
Yeah.
frankly, you know what I mean? It's probably, I don't know, rather painful or whatever it is. She's not comfortable doing it. And I think that's a lot of the news that we're hearing is these management companies are saying, you have to do this. It's $500,000, or whatever it is. And I think that's where you're getting into some dangerous territory where these models need support. They need mentorship. There's a lot of people trying to take advantage of beautiful people these days. I mean, that's always been the case, but I think more so now than ever because we have these platforms that, the more explicit it is, the better it is. But at the same time, I will say with production, with my production company, I have kind of been researching a little bit. And it's funny because I do think we're kind of reaching a plateau with that. What I mean by that is corn is on the down slope. People are kind of, where else can you go with it? At this point, you can already find whatever it is you want. Like, what else do we
Yeah.
need? You know what I mean? At this point. And so it's interesting that audio has actually become the next kind of thing is that morning messages, very explicit stories. And I think that's really a sign of the times is that people are taking a little more charge of their lives and connecting maybe on a more human level. And I think that's a healthy place. I do. So I think, I don't know, I feel like if we can continue to create a community that's not so shock value and a little more human, I think we're going to see some changes kind of in the sex work industry. But I would like to see, sex workers having more rights, that they should be able to, much like Nevada, file their taxes legally, things like that. I'm not sure how I feel about brothels, to be honest with you, but I do feel if there was some sort of a licensure, I was licensed for, I don't even know how many, years in Nevada, and I paid my taxes as a licensed legal courtesan. And I think if that was available to people, kind of like how the cannabis industry used to be so completely taboo, that's not the case anymore. Times are changing. You just have to be licensed. You just have to file your taxes. I think we would see a lot less of these shady characters, these shady daddies, managers, management companies. I think it would start to go by the wayside because I think that the tide is changing.
Yes, it is. And I've got mixed feelings about I guess, the call girls or the ones who work independently. They're not owned by anybody. As long as you're an adult, you should be able to do whatever you want to, as long as you're not forced to do it. A lot of people agree and a lot of people disagree with that. And it's
Say, when you say like if you're there by choice, I think that
mhm.
that's another interesting point is what does that mean exactly? There were certain parts of my career, where I had boyfriends where I really did think like, oh, I'm this empowered woman. But when I kind of stepped away from the relationship, I'm like, why did I do that tour? You know what I mean? Or would I have stayed home if I didn't have someone telling me how cool it was that, I don't know. I do think it's a fine line. I think that it's really important to self check all the time and really evaluate why am I doing this? Is it because I feel good about myself and I feel sexy and pretty and I make money and I smile and it's genuine? Do I like and respect the people that I'm around and that are touching my body? That's a big thing. I can honestly say very few times in my career, honestly, have I ever gone to bed with someone that I just didn't like, or I didn't like the way they touched me, or I didn't feel safe, or, I would exit those situations. If you are giving yourself to somebody, no matter what your job title is, you should still be having fun and enjoying yourself. Like if you like your job, we're all going to have shitty days. You know what I mean? We just are a bad day. But if you find yourself not feeling good after, that's probably a red flag, or you feel like I'm going to let somebody down. You've
Mhm.
let yourself down. You know what I mean? So I think it's a lot of self check, whether it's a strip club, an escort, a online platform, Instagram, anything. Do you feel like you're being pressured by a fan base? Show us whatever. Last time you showed your butt, show this. Great. If you feel empowered and that makes you feel good about yourself, do it. But if you kind of hesitate, whatever, then that's something that you definitely should check. Definitely reevaluate if you feel fulfilled. And I think that goes for any career. It doesn't matter what
Right.
you do. You could be again, an emergency room surgeon. If you're not feeling good about what you do and you feel that it's bringing you down instead of bringing you up, then it doesn't really matter. You should exit stage left no matter what it is. So yeah.
Uh, yeah, I agree. I have gone to a strip club before in the past, and with a bunch of guys from work, they said, "Hey, let's go to the strip club." I'm going, "Wait a minute." And so I went ahead and went, and it was nice.
It's
Be
fun.
honest, I enjoyed myself.
And don't get me wrong, I am not in any way saying every stripper in the strip club is there. I'm just saying, by and large, I've seen it more in the
Mhm.
strip clubs than I ever did.
Yeah.
But by no means am I saying that the vast majority of girls, and then, God, I love a good strip club. Who doesn't? You know what I mean? I think strip clubs, honestly, I hope they don't go away. And I'll tell you why I don't. Because I've noticed, specifically men, I'll just say a little more toward the men. I'm only speaking about men here. Men that solely watch pornography or have an online, thing. And I'm not even talking about addiction. I'm just saying their main source of sexual content, of, interacting with somebody. If it's porn or online and they're not actually engaging with a physical human being at any point in time, I feel like they get weird. You know what I mean? The social skills kind of go away and people become more objectified. And I don't mean that in like the feminist kind of thing. I'm just saying it sort of loses that it's an actual person and it starts to become more of an object. So I feel like if you go to a strip club, you're having a drink with somebody, you're talking, you're touching, you're engaging. It's more personal. And I hope we don't ever as a society lose that. Yay for naked girlies on stage. You know what I mean? Truly, I it's just think it's an opportunity if you're there by your own accord, feel like a star, get up on stage, have a good time. I think it's great. I really do. And I hope it never goes away. It's a piece of Americana that should always be part of our landscape.
Yeah. I think it always will be. I mean, there's
Hope
always gonna be.
so.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
One
do
thing
feel
I
very strongly about that though, that people have to engage physically. As someone who my entire job was to be physically there, I can attest that. I mean, that was the whole reason I was on talk shows and everything, is because I very much openly spoke about what I heard from men and couples about why men cheat, why men, micro cheat, which is a new word now that I've learned. Why is that? And my opinion is that we just don't talk. People just assume that their fetishes, taboos, fantasies, whatever, their partner's not going to be into it. They don't listen. They don't understand me. Well, you don't know unless you try. And if that person really is judging you or it's not compatible, then I don't mean to be obtuse to the sanctity of marriage, but leave. You know what I mean? That person is not for you. You're not going to be able to make that relationship work. All that's going to happen is resentment, secrets, unfulfilled needs, unfulfilled desires, unmet fantasies. That's how people meet. They bicker. They bicker. And really, I
Mhm.
feel like at the core of it, it's because they're probably with the wrong person. You have to be with somebody that gets you on an animal level, I guess, more primitive. They understand your brain and your kinks and your, what you're into, and sharing that stuff openly, like I say with pornography, don't hide it, share it with your partner. She's probably into it. He's probably into it. You know what I mean? Like that's really, and I think that's where relationship dynamics and boundaries and things like that come into play. And so I do feel honestly like there could be so much more communication and less cheating. And it's just kind of simplistic, really. If that person isn't, your heart's desire, if you will, down below and up top, they may not be for you. I mean, that's all I'm
Right.
saying. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's just my 2 cents on, I really think that the secrets and things like that, people could have a lot more fun together, really. And I used to say that all the time as a courtesan. My job was to listen mostly. I heard men talk all about how unhappy they were. My favorite story, I'll share this. I had a
Okay.
gentleman who was a client of mine. And I used to ask him, why do you lie to your wife about coming to see me? Like she knows, she's emailed me, you know? And he would laugh and he'd be like, I just can't admit it. I just can't. And I'm like, again, she knows. After a bunch of time went by, I finally just said to him, what's keeping you there? And he said to me, family obligation. That's it. Is I just feel like I'd be a big loser, if I left my wife. And we had a long conversation, doesn't matter, but we got pretty in depth, and by the next morning, he has pretty much resolved that he was gonna talk to his wife. So cut to a year later, I get a letter or a postcard, I should say. He's on a cruise. He filed for divorce. He's living his best life. He's got his kids coming, they're grown. And so they come into the beach house. And it was basically a thank you letter of saying, you were right. She's happier. I'm happier. I don't feel like I need to keep secrets. I'm single, dating around, I mean, I think that's healthy. I think it's healthy to live your life. So there's that. I think people should go to strip clubs together. Go hang out at the strip club, everyone. That's my point.
Yeah.
Touch people, talk to people.
One thing that I've always wondered and been wanting to ask, I guess you're the perfect person to ask. One of the strippers asked one of the people that I was with that he wanted a private dance in the back room. What is that all about? I mean,
The
it was
champagne
going to
room.
cost him
The champagne.
several $100s.
Yeah. Honestly, that's where it comes up to personal choice again. Every club is different on how those work, but usually it's a more intimate private dance. Say a
Mhm.
house dance will say is 20, just a regular everyday old dance out on the floor. So you would say, I don't know, a couple $100, you get to go in, and of course prices go up. You can have champagne and whatever the heck it is you want. But anyway, she'll take you back and there's like a booth usually. Again, whatever happens back there, they always say what happens in the champagne room stays in the champagne room. But every club is different. And again, that's where you get into, is she being managed? Is the club managing her? I've worked for clubs where I've quit because I was encouraged, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. If you want to get on the good shift, you might want to offer a little more. I managed clubs for a while. It is actually someone's job to clean the condoms behind the couch and under the couch at the end of the night. So it just depends, who the girl is, who the club is, who the manager is. I mean, it really depends. But usually that's what you're paying for, even if it's just a regular old everyday, they call it a VIP or champagne room, whatever their verbiage is. You're just paying for privacy. Let's just say she is just a regular stripper. It's really just more privacy. In my experience, especially as the feature, usually you would get champagne rooms after you got off stage. For me,
Mhm.
it was honestly more sitting around drinking champagne and somebody looking at my boobs. There really wasn't a whole lot going on back there. You know what I mean? Truly. So it kind of really just depends, you know what I mean, on what the situation is. Is it a Sunday afternoon or is it a Friday night at 11 o'clock? There's no telling what's going on. So, yeah, that's what that's all about.
Okay. What about what does your family think about the whole situation.
My family is the reason I ended up in the adult entertainment industry. And the reason I say that, the satanic panic, that really truly was, and again, if you're not familiar, whoever's listening, please do research on this. This was a really big thing, and people went to jail, myself included. And there are actually some people still in jail to this day over crimes that by our today's standards ridiculous. We know that these things are not real, you know what I mean? So that for me, I don't know really who cut each other off. I guess it was really they cut me off. Nobody, no one came. You know, we call it child abandonment now.
Mhm.
At 14, I was arrested under, like I say, the satanic panic thing. I was sent to, which are now illegal, called a residential treatment center. I jokingly call them the 90s version of filing cabinets for bad kids. And now, since these things don't exist, they've been shut down for insurance fraud. And, you know, we all know that it was a farce. You know what I mean? That these are things in the past for a reason. So for me, I don't have any family. I have not had family since I was carried out of my house at 14 years old by law enforcement for having Motley Crue tapes. Quite frankly, you know what I mean? And liking Ozzy Osbourne, you know what I mean?
Wow.
Sorry. You know, I was a big Kiss fan, a big Judas. I still am. I'm a metalhead through and through. And that I think just kind of it was a sign of the times. And so in answer to your question, I have zero contact with my family. The stalker, the person that was stalking me, was a family member of mine.
Mm.
And that had been going on for a very long time. But when I went on Anderson Cooper's show, that
Mhm.
was really what set that in motion because it was very much the family told everyone I was dead, quite frankly. They told everyone I died in a drunk driving accident, that I was killed by a drunk driving accident. So when I popped back up on TV, howdy ho, you know what I mean? It was very upsetting to that family member who had recently gotten a very high up position.
Hmm.
That started the whole just nightmare of events. But like I say, you know, courtesanship, it kept me safe. I had security, top notch security. I lived in a very secure building because I was able to afford to live on the 36th floor of an incredibly secure building with gates that came down and, you know, and your car went underground and, you know, so in that way, I'm very thankful for that industry because I don't know if that person would have, I don't know if I'd be sitting here. You know, I really don't. That person probably would have succeeded the first 3 times. And then they tried to take my life, you know. So that's a loaded question. My family, that's an incredibly loaded question. I make my own family and they love me. So there's, yeah, there's
Yeah,
the answer to
that's
you.
good.
Yes, they love me very much for who I am.
Family doesn't have to be blood.
No, no, it does not. Absolutely. You make your own family. I truly believe that. And honestly, again, it's the same thing I say about the marriage thing or any other relationship. Blood does not mean you are tied to that person for the rest of your life. If that person is toxic and bringing you down and judging you and you are truly happy and you know there's really no reason for that person to need to intervene in your life like you know a drug problem or you know or something if you're genuinely really just doing your thing, maybe they don't need to be in your life. And I don't mean to sound like, you know, cut everybody off, but I will say from my own experience, living under other people's opinions and constantly defending who you are as a human being does more damage than anything I could possibly think of. Telling yourself what a piece of garbage you are all day is not conducive to mental health, and nor is listening to someone tell you, you know, that you're not worthy or you should be ashamed, you're bringing the family down, or if that's the narrative that you're hearing, that's sling load, man. Like, seriously, find some people that are there for you and support you and love you for exactly who you are. So
Yeah, I was
that's
I was
my
in a toxic marriage years ago. Didn't know how miserable I was until I got out of it and found how a true relationship should be.
exactly, exactly. And that's so important because like I say, I mean, I'm saying very recently, I just got out of a relationship. To be quite frank, I'm just going to kind of share because you shared that with me. I found myself as a resilience, a trained resiliency instructor, a anger management, certified anger management specialist, all my degrees, everything, I'm going on all of these empowerment podcasts and all this. And yet I look around and I'm in an abusive relationship. Slipped one by me. You know what I mean? I really was like, I'm being screamed at, yelled at. I don't feel
Mhm.
safe in my home. I'm being told awful, awful things about myself to the point where I'm starting to believe them. And I'm sure we're shaking your head where I'm like, maybe I am a loser. Maybe I don't provide. You're right. And then you start getting tired and you don't want to work and you just don't really, things just kind of lose their joy. And I'm guilty. I realized it myself. Just like you said, I kind of woke up one day and I'm like, I think I'm in an abusive relationship. My God, what happened?
Yeah.
And so I'm so glad that you shared that because I think once you're out of it, it hurts. I'm hurting. I'm still hurting, but I think it's that also that tingling excitement of I'm free. I am free from listening to what a piece of garbage I am like all day long. And it's very freeing. It's very freeing. And yeah, I think it's a feeling like no other when you realize, hey, I can make my own choices. I don't need this person in my life.
Mhm.
I don't need this person bringing me down, quite frankly. So yeah, I think we find our own magic when we start cutting off the dead wood, I guess
Yeah.
is what it
I
is.
think a lot of people think an abusive marriage is physical.
No.
It I think
Emotional abuse is, I honestly think to some degree worse because sometimes I found
I've
myself saying, I wish you just hit me in the face so I know to leave. You know what I mean? But it's like when it's mind games and all this other stuff, it's not as like now I leave. Someone hit me in the face. I should go. Emotional abuse, it drags on for years. Am I right? I mean,
right.
I-
Yeah. Yeah, physical abuse, you can recover from it. Mental abuse or emotional abuse, it stays with you for years afterwards.
Yeah, I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD. And that is the difference, just so folks are aware, your listeners. PTSD is an incident. And I do mean like war is an incident. You know what I mean? Like a legit, a car accident. I'm not saying like one tiny thing happened. I'm saying an incident. Complex PTSD is when you're living in that incident for years at a time. My ex-husband, who I'm still extremely close with, he's my best friend. We're still, like I say, he's a wonderful, wonderful person. He did 5 tours of war. He has complex PTSD because he did several tours of war and it went on for 5, 6 years. And so same for me, I have complex PTSD because of the stalking, because it went on for so long. And I think that as people in a toxic relationship, like yourself, like me, we've been through years of systematic abuse. And I think that's where it levels up. It's not just PTSD, it rewires your brain in such a way you've been almost reconditioned psychologically to not be able to think for yourself, to make decisions based on constant survival mode and fear, getting in trouble, that feeling all the time. I used to call myself Ed McMahon because that's what I felt like. I was always so stressed out around this person that my shoulders were like, way up here. And I'm like, and I realized as this person left my life, my shoulders began to come back down and I can get a full breath. You know what I mean? Like I'm not in constant survival mode. And I think that that's what a lot of people in toxic relationships kind of need to self check. Do you actually have PTSD or complex PTSD from this person's behavior toward you? And I think to kind of bring it home for our sex trafficking conversation, I think that's where that support network comes in, that self check of why am I in
Mhm.
this relationship? Why am I on this stage? Why am I in this strange man's bed? If you don't have a rational answer for those questions, maybe you should reevaluate, and say, maybe this isn't the right choice for me. This isn't something I'm doing voluntarily, or I should leave this situation. Because I do think hindsight is 2020, especially when it comes to an abusive relationship. It hurts to leave, but man, does it feel good once it's like that first night you sleep in your bed, all by yourself, not worried about getting yelled at for snoring too loud or whatever the heck it is. It's a great feeling. So I encourage everyone to self check and find a support network, whether it's sex trafficking or a shitty relationship, whatever it is.
Tell me about your businesses that you got going.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I really appreciate that. Yeah, so I've always been a serial entrepreneur. Even when I was a courtesan, I was an LLC. I was BSJ Enterprises, Bethany St. James Enterprises. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I had great mentorship, and a lot of my clients, courtesan clients, were pretty high up in some banking and entertainment fields. And so they would kind of advise me. And so I was very lucky, in that way to learn how to save money and run a business that I was my business. I used to jokingly say that I charge money for what people give away for free at every bar in America on a Friday night. That's pretty smart business.
Yeah, it
I
is.
mean, really, I'm charging X amount of dollars, five figures or whatever for pretty much what Sally Joe's passing off at the Hooters for free. So I learned, I mean, all joking aside though, putting a humorous spin on it, I really did learn business through the industry, which is another thing I think a lot of people don't understand is you really have to learn how to manage your money, in that industry. And a lot of people, they come out very successful, they do. So I invested in my first business and it was a UAV drone security company. We do, gosh, all kinds of stuff from military contracts to like solar farm security. We do agriculture where the drones can actually read the soil. Do I know anything about this? No. I just knew it was a good business model. So I also figured out that you hire people much smarter than yourself. You have
Yeah,
the idea,
exactly.
hire people to execute it. So that was kind of the model that I followed. But my dream since I was a kid was to own a production company. And so I started using these other little businesses that I had started, a small graphic design company. Kind of did the same thing there, farmed the work out and, different things. Started learning AI filmmaking and, how to kind of tell a story and write a script. And I bought a house in a ghost town that was big and beautiful and I remodeled it. I repainted it all by myself. I lived out here for going on 4 years now, other than the brief relationships that I was in all by myself. I've been out here and I've been doing it. I'm doing podcasts. I have a show. I'm working on 3 pitches right now for streaming networks for TV series. So basically, I just create concepts. I build what's called series Bibles, not like religious Bibles, but every show that you've ever watched has a series Bible. And it talks about all the characters and what is the look of the show and what is the world and the neighborhood and every single solitary little tiny thing that comes from some Looney Tunes person like me that goes, no, we need a character with 2 heads, or whatever it is. And so that's pretty much what I do is I build these crazy worlds and I pitch these shows and make my own shows and I have social media. I like to do the lives and just kind of talk to people. And that's really been helping the traction for other projects that I've been doing. I'm looking for investors. Also, the house has been vetted as haunted by paranormal
Mm,
investigators, which is a huge subject of the show. And so it's an open location, and you can go to Twisted Reels, Twisted REELS Productions.com, and book a visit. You can come and ghost hunt, faux hunt. We have a lot of UFO sightings around here. Hang out in the ghost town or all around, a tarot reading. There's all kinds of fun stuff you can do here. Yeah, there's that. And then, of course, I have to do my shout out. Bethany St. James does have a fan view. Nothing too naughty on there, just some cheesecakey fun stuff, vintage old photos and whatnot. So that's fun too. Pretty much me. That's what I have going on. That's my big long spiel about what I do.
what's the name of your production company in case
It's
somebody wants to?
Yeah, it's Twisted Reels Productions. And again, it's
Okay,
REELS, like a film reel. And my show, you can see it on YouTube under Twisted Reels Productions channel, and it's called Dead Air Energies. So it's really exciting. It's very cool. The show is going to be taking a little bit of a shift. It's going to be a little less focused on certain areas, a little more focused on just my life here. So it's going to be really cool to see what the upcoming episodes have.
sounds good. Well, I appreciate you being on the show,
Thank
and
you. Thanks for
thank
having
you.
me. It was fun.
Thank you for all the information that you've provided us. I've learned a lot, learned some things I didn't know. And that's one thing I like about doing these podcasts. And I tell people I'm not an expert on human trafficking, but I try to bring the experts on the show so other people can learn.
Appreciate. Thank you. It's been great to be here. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Bye bye. Well, that's it for our show for today. Hope you learned something that will perhaps protect you and a family member. Follow me on Facebook. Go to my website, davidjstory.com, to learn more about the Omega book series, my podcast, and my blogs. And always remember, always watch your six and others too.